Well, hey folks, happy Saturday. It's Brett here. So first and most important, our PowerPoint heroes. So from the Unit 5 assignment for our PowerPoint, let's send a shout out and congratulations to Brooklyn and to Emily for very high scores on our PowerPoint presentation. Very, very good. Great job, ladies. Great job. And everybody, really, a really good job. I know that some of you, after viewing the scores, some of you might feel a little bit disappointed or discouraged. And that's understandable. I mean, it wasn't very easy, and again, this is my first time having taught this course, and in reflection, I think that maybe the instructions weren't quite as clear. But the good news is that the median score in the class was 75. That's a solid C. That's right, kind of where it is normally, if you sort of measure the curves and those sorts of things. That's the way it worked out. So we did pretty well with the assignment. But if I were to capture the three areas where I think most folks had the hardest time, it would be in these three areas. First, clarity with describing the problem. Second, it would be with accuracy of the questions that we ask from those three domains of thinking. And the third would be an application of those intellectual standards. So in the first case, the clarity of the problem, perhaps you chose to talk on the topic of gun control. There were a lot of folks that tried to tackle gun violence or gun control, and that's a wonderful topic. But that's not a problem. The problem might be rightly described as an increase in gun violence in teenagers under 18 in inner cities, born in low-income families. That's a very specific type of a problem statement that can be researched and can be discussed, and you can understand that better. And it also sets up the kinds of domains of thinking that are going to follow from that. You're automatically going to talk about culture in inner city. You're automatically going to talk about economics in low-income families. You're automatically going to talk about some political considerations, for example. Another topic, for example, might be abortion and the abortion debate. Well, that's not a problem. What's the problem about the abortion debate? Is the problem that there are an increasing number of people calling for the revocation of the Roe v. Wade decision? That's a very specific problem. And I think that in general, we weren't specific enough in articulating the problem. And if we don't get that right, well, then the whole rest of it just doesn't hold together. It's hard to build from a problem that's not clearly specified. So as we go forward, we want to make sure we always very clearly, accurately, and precisely describe the problems that we're trying to solve. So that was the first point, clearly describing the problem. The second point, accuracy of our questions. So we had our questions from our domains of thinking. They were on page 154 of our, no. Hold on. 139. I have the same book you do. I'm using the same book. Beginning on page 139, our domains of thinking: economic, political, sociological, social, and so on. And so our questions, we picked three domains, and that had to happen between slides 2 and 5. So you had 4 slides to ask 3 questions. So probably the paramount way to go about this would be, in your first slide, a very clear presentation of the specific problem. In your second slide, you highlight and outline the 3 domains of thinking from which you'll ask questions, and then you use slides 3, 4, and 5 to ask those specific questions. And the questions have to be the kind of questions that get after the domain of thinking toward the problem. So if my problem is the increase in gun violence in inner city teenagers that were born to low-income families, and I ask a question from an economic perspective, I might ask, what are the economic influences that affect a rise in gun violence in inner cities? What are the cultural influences that might be responsible for the rise in this violence? And so on. So the questions have to be very specifically tailored toward that specific problem set that we have. That's what I mean by accuracy of questions. And finally, application of the intellectual standards. There were a lot of folks who wrote about that thought that assumptions and facts were the things that we were after, when in reality, the intellectual standards are best described on page 103 in this breakdown of a table here, right? So our intellectual standards are things like clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, breadth, logic, significance, and fairness. And we needed to bring 3 of those to bear against the intellectual domain question. So 1 against a particular question. So in the question of the economic influence of inner city gun violence, I might ask, am I being precise? Could I be more specific in asking that question? In terms of breadth, am I assuming another point of view as I ask about the cultural influences? Have I put myself in their shoes? Those kinds of things. So those were the 3 general areas where folks really kind of struggled with our PowerPoint assignment. But again, overall, we did very well. Solid C is the average on that assignment. And if we have to take lessons going forward, let's take some lessons going forward into week 6, which starts on Wednesday of next week, which is our next assignment. Don't forget, we still have the assessment for this week, week 5. But next week, week 6, we have another assignment, and it's an essay. So let's look forward from our lessons learned perspective on our PowerPoint and apply that to the paper that we're going to write. And what would that look like? Well, I recommend at least the following. I recommend that if we're going to look at those really cool ideas on page 154, 18 ideas for improving our studies, let's look at idea number 1, number 15, and number 16. Here's an example. Look at number 1. Make sure you thoroughly understand the requirements, there it says of each class, but in this case of the assignment. In the case of the PowerPoint, it was 12 slides with a title slide and a reference slide. So if you had anything other than 14 slides, it kind of wasn't the requirement. What's the requirement here? Minimum 2 pages. I printed it. Provide an example from your own experience where you acted in accordance with one or more of the patterns of irrational or unethical decision making. And it goes on. It tells you exactly what to do. Explain the egocentrism or sociocentrism as well as pathological tendencies of mind. How could you have applied the keys to sound decision making? Your response should be at least 2 pages in length. Double spaced. Type using 12-point Times New Roman font. All sources used, including the textbook, must be referenced, so on and so forth. APA format. APA format, if you are not familiar with it, requires a title page and requires a references page. So at least there's 4 pages. And I'm going to give you a maximum of 4 pages of written text. Add to the title page and your reference page, that's 6 pages. So written stuff between 2 and 4 pages. So what does that look like? Well, the directions don't give you any idea. So let me try to give you a tip. I like tips. Here's my tip. Go old school with this. And by old school, I mean think the old-fashioned 5-paragraph essay. You've got an intro, you've got 3 body paragraphs, and you have a conclusion. That's the workhorse of essay writing. And this is a 100 level class, so you can't go wrong with it. So here's what that looks like. I think, my recommendation, use your introduction to tell that story, whatever the story is you want to tell about yourself. In my particular case, my wife asked me, "Sweetheart, were you looking at that girl in the mall?" And I say, "Well, no, honey, I wasn't." Right? So there's a decision maker. She's laughing at me from the kitchen now. Honey, it was a made-up example, totally. But the point is, there's a decision behind my answering that question. Okay, so I'm going to tell the story of my personal example. That's the story that I'm going to tell. I'm going to finish that introduction, that nice story, and because it's a story, it's an attention grabber, and the reader gets drawn into your paper. Tell your story in your introduction, make it short, 1 paragraph, and finish the introduction with a thesis sentence. Every essay has to have a thesis sentence. So does yours. The thesis sentence is going to be a claim about what you learned from that experience, from that example, as it relates to these other things. That's the thesis sentence. It sets up the paper. Now, that's your introduction, your story, and your thesis sentence. Now you have 3 body paragraphs to work with. Your first body paragraph should do the first thing that you're asked to do. Relate your example, give the example specifics as they relate to the patterns of irrational or unethical decision making. Your second body paragraph should give your example specifics as they relate to egocentrism or sociocism, as well as any pathological tendencies of mind. Your third paragraph should be the example specifics as they relate to how could you have applied keys to sound decision making to approach the situation more rationally. Those are your 3 body paragraphs. And then your conclusion. If you approach the essay that way, and you come in between 2 and 4 pages of written text, I guarantee you'll do far better than you thought you might otherwise. Finally, last point for me today, our discussions, they're getting much, much better. Again, just a reminder though, the initial post is due by Saturday, and I've just responded to all of the ones that were there. And our response posts are due by Tuesday. But keep those going, number 1. Number 2, always make sure that your response post continues the conversation, keeps it going. And you do that by asking questions of each other. I know you might not get to it till late on Tuesday, and somebody else might ask you a question, and you don't respond to it, or you've asked somebody a question because I'm telling you that you have to ask questions and they don't respond to your question. I don't want you to worry about that. What I want you to do is the very best that you can do by responding to a post in a thoughtful, engaging way that asks questions and keeps the conversation going. If you do that over and over, pretty soon everybody just gets better. I promise, I guarantee. Okay? And if you have any ideas about other things that I could be doing to help you out, please let me know. I'm interested in this idea number 6. Your professor is a coach, so if there's something I could be doing that's more helpful to you, please let me know. Use the Ask the Professor form. I haven't seen any questions in there in a while. I'm always eager to answer questions, so post them in there if you have them. Have a great weekend. The rest of the weekend, I'm going to keep working on my No Shave November beard. I hope you're doing something cool for Thanksgiving when it comes. Talk to you guys later.